Hello, welcome back to another Python challenge, which I call generating tuples or tuples, lists and dictionaries. This is a beginner's tutorial. I am promoting your input. I will just show you one approach to completing this challenge, and I would love to see what your approach is. So please have a go, leave that in the comments and we can have a look and share that knowledge. I do try to approach these challenges for beginners trying to utilize code that's nice and friendly and expansive, so it isn't necessarily the most compressed way of completing the challenge. So this is why I always try and promote you to generate your own answers and potentially then share that knowledge with the rest of the community. So let me just explain this challenge. It seems quite simple to begin with, but it gets maybe particularly complicated when working with dictionaries. So to complete this challenge, you should write a program that accepts a list of numbers. So we're going to need to ask the user to input a list of numbers or strings, and that needs to be separated by commas. And the idea here is that you need to generate or create a program which will take that input and then turn that into a tuple, a list, and a dictionary. So this is where it gets tricky here, where you need more information. What type of dictionary, or what is the format of the dictionary that needs to be generated? So let me just quickly explain what we're looking for in terms of generating a dictionary for this challenge. So let's assume that the user types in 1, 2, 3 into an input. So the idea is we need to generate a list, a tuple, and a dictionary. So a dictionary has a key value. So what I'd like you to return if this was entered would be a key using a numerical system starting from 0. So the first item was entered 1. The second input will be key 1. And then the input in this case was 2 up here. And then obviously the third one, the key would be 2. And then the value would be 3. So that's the format we're trying to generate for the dictionary, given the input of 1, 2, 3. So that's all the parameters for this challenge. Have a go, have a look, and then we'll come back and I'll show you one example of a potential method or approach to complete this challenge. And then, like I said, like I keep saying, then please see if you can compress this, make it into the shortest possible way of completing this example, if you like, or potentially try and be a little bit more exotic and utilize other Python tools. Always good to see different approaches to complete the same challenge. Right, so let's have a go. So let's take in some values from the user values. So let's say values equals input. There we go. So let's first of all take these values, and we're going to need to potentially split to remove the comma. So we can then utilize it within a tuple, within a list and dictionary. So we didn't need to have that comma, but again, I just wanted you to practice thinking about filtering different aspects from a user input. And there are obviously a few different ways we can do that. So let's go for, let's just call this bad naming, new values. And let's say that equals values dot split. And then we're going to split. So we're going to essentially remove the commas from the inputs. So we are expecting the user to type in a value input. So let's say, let's just add something here into input, add a, please insert new items. There we go. Obviously that's not needed. Okay, right, so that's that done. So we can test this out. If you are completely new to this, then give this a go first and then just have a look, see what is output. And it's always good to understand, because it's very easy to go through examples and just write out a whole list of commands and then get the output, but you don't fully understand the process of that data, how the data is changing. It's good to understand that process, because that's where you'll need to potentially start to think about debugging, and you'll need to get into the program to see how the data is being converted and changed and formatted. So let's go ahead and, oh no, a Python tree example. So you can see that's what we have at the moment. So interesting, as soon as we've generated this, it looks like we already have a list, and we've already generated a list by just following this process. So if we read the documentation, in actual fact, by utilizing split, the split method actually takes a string in this case and turns it into a list. So there's actually nothing we need to do here in terms of converting our data into a list, because we've already utilized split, and that's doing it for us. Okay, so we already have our list. So that's the list sorted. Right, so let's think about a tuple or tuple. So the tuple or tuple is a built-in, and we can utilize the tuple command, or sorry, the function to actually create tuples in Python. So very simply, the syntax is going to be, let's put this into a new variable. So let's say convert into a tuple. So that's going to be just the tuple function. And then we simply just need to pass in the new values that have been sent through split here. So new values, and then we can cast that into a tuple. So let's go ahead and print that out. So this is going to be our tuple. And there we go. Okay, so now it gets a little bit more fun. So we're going to need to build a dictionary here. So we take in an input 1, 2, 3. We saw earlier from the preview that we're now expecting the program to generate the keys for us. So there's going to be some sort of loop needed here potentially. Right, so let's first of all work out the range of the keys. So we're going to use range here, and what we're going to do with this range is we're going to work out, how many keys we're going to need. So let's go for 0, and then we're going to need the length of the input. So the input is here. So let's go for this. Now we're going to get the length of this. In actual fact, we're going to get the length of this list here. That's being converted into a list. So we get that. So we now have the range, the amount of kind of loops that we're going to need to loop through. And we can then potentially utilize this to start to generate our keys. So now we have our range. We now have an indication of how many inputs the user makes, and we can build a range of numbers based upon that. Let's just have a look at that. So for I in keys, so we're just going to loop around these keys, and how many times we loop around will depend on the range. So let's go ahead and just print out I, and we'll give that a go. So we just enter 3 items here, and you can see that we're outputting 0, 1, and 2. So we'll just highlight out our print here to make it a little bit clearer that we're just outputting this. So I'll clear that, run that again. So here we're outputting 0, 1, and 2. Now that represents the amount of inputs. So 1, 2, 3, we have 3 inputs. And obviously if I were to change the amount of inputs, the range would change. And now we have 4 outputs, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now this looks like a good way of creating keys for my dictionary. Remember, the dictionary has a key and a value, and I wanted it to start from 0 and then continue from there. So this looks like a good way of automatically generating the right amount of keys and looping through the right amount of times for the data that is inserted into the input. So if you're completely new to here, remember the new values here is a list. And what we're doing is we're using len here, which is generating the length of that list. And obviously that list depends on the amount of inputs that the user has made. Right, so with that in place, let's now think about generating a new dictionary. So let's create a new dictionary. So an empty dictionary here, so we can populate it with some values. And now let's go ahead and populate it. So Let's start off by grabbing the dictionary, and we're going to generate a key. Well, the key in this case is going to be generated from I. Remember, the keys have been generated from the range, and that's creating a set of numbers based upon the user's input. Cool. So here is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and that's all generated again. Hopefully that makes sense now. Apologies for keep embellishing that. Right, so we've got the key now, so we need the value. Okay, so the values at the moment, we can say is stored here in this list, which is great because we can iterate over a list. Now remember, if you're not familiar with lists, so let's just pretend we create this list here. Each list item here has an index. So this number 1 here is in position 0. This here is in position 1. This here is in position 2 and 3. So this is what's being stored here in new values, a list similar to this. So what we can do is we can use the index, the position of these values to then determine what should be next to, or what should be the key value. Now what's really interesting here is that we're generating these numbers already. So we can use these numbers from I to actually pick out from our list the numbers that are in our list that's generated from the user input. Okay, so we've got our key. So we're going to say here equals, we're going to grab the new values, the values that the user's entered. That's going to be in the list. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab the value in that list. Which one to grab? Well, that depends on I, the number from our range, the numbers that have been generated from our range. Remember, the first number that goes in is 0. So our dictionary is going to make a new entry, a key 0, and values is going to grab the value from the list in position 0, which is the first item in the list. And it's just going to loop over the amount of times based upon the range, which is based upon the user's input. Okay, so hopefully now we can just go ahead and print. And hopefully at this point, 1, 2, 3, we'll go for 4. And there we go. That's the format that we wanted to generate. So key 0 is 1, key 1 is value 2, key 2 is value 3, and key 3 is value 4, and so on. So that's one approach. So there are a few different other approaches here. So just to quickly go through this, although you may have generated this yourself, hopefully that gives you a good breakdown of this. So we can, let's just highlight that out. So what we can do here, so I'll just comment that out, not highlight that out. So what we can do here is just essentially just create a one-liner. So let's go for our dictionary again, equals. So what we're going to need to do here then, let's say I, colon, and then let's get the values. And then what values do you want to get? Well, that depends on I. So hopefully you can start to see where the relevance of I here is. Okay, so that grabs a value. So now we create a loop. So for I in, and we know that's all based upon the range. So let's go for range, and we know what the range needs to be. It starts from 0, and then we get the length of new values. Let's just break this down a bit. Okay, so you kind of see, if you don't understand or can't follow this format, you can kind of see from the example before what's happening. So for in terms of the new values here, so the value of our list, of our dictionary, sorry, is being generated by I, and the I number is being generated from our range here. So here we have the loop. So for I in range, 0 to the range depending upon the length of our list, the list being generated by the user input, we can see that we have the key, which is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 based upon the range, and then we grab the value from our list, and you can see that's going to then generate our key on the left hand side and our value on the other side. And here's our loop that's going to loop through the amount of times to generate the amount of key values that we want to have or are needed based upon the user input. Okay, so that's kind of a one-liner, so that should work exactly the same, hopefully. Oh, I've got to print it out. Apologies. Oh, the suspense, the suspense. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there we go. So the final example here, we could use enumerate. So if you haven't used enumerate before, basically it's a method that adds a counter to an iterable and then returns it. So potentially we don't need to utilize what we've been using before, this range here. We can just use enumerate, and that is essentially, like I said, it's just going to add a counter, and that counter starts from 0. So a simple example of utilizing that. So we utilize what we have already. So we've got the input, so that's new values. So let's just say x equals, and then we say dict, referring to the fact we want to create a dictionary. We want to create a dictionary from the list that's been generated from the user input. And now let's just go ahead and use enumerate. Really simple. So the values for that is going to be new values. But there we go. So let's go ahead and print that. And there we have the same outcome. So I do hope there was some value there, particularly with enumerate. That might be something that you've not utilized before. If you do have any other comments or suggestions to complete this challenge, then please leave them in the comments. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.